Howdy, everybody. Humanities for Shasta College. How y'all doing out there? How was your weekend? Well, we are down to the final weeks of course with 4 weeks of class left. That's it, folks. May 20th. We're out of here. So it's crunch time. We are now entering in an era of film that's really, really important. Independent films needed an audience, they needed venues because they weren't getting produced in Hollywood, who by now, this would be the 80s, is producing Top Gun and Rocky 1, 2, 3, 4, Goonies, Gremlins. I know those are beloved films. That's okay. But I'm just saying they're producing a lot of really kind of frivolous entertainment, not a lot of depth or meaning. And Superman 1, 2, 3 started the Batman franchise there, I think in '89, the first one coming out, and that was going to start. I mean, they're still making Batmans. They're coming out on Netflix. There's so many of them now. You cannot keep track who the Batman is or who the Joker is. Everybody wants to play the Joker. Um, so if you were an independent thinking person who wanted to write and direct possibly a film that wasn't about a person in a cape trying to save the world from a bad, dastardly villain, well, then how do you get that? How do you get your film shown? How do you get raise money for it? Well, film festivals is the short answer to that one. And there wasn't very many out there at one time. There was always been famous ones like the Berlin Film Festival, yes, and the Venice Film Festivals. Those were almost they're almost dominated by foreign films with major league directors, not independent people, unknown directors that were making films on a shoestring. Then along comes a film festival called the U.S. Film Festival, and it was bought by Robert Redford, the actor and director, and he changed the name to Sundance. He It's called Sundance because he played the Sundance Kid in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And so he used his fame and his fortune, his notoriety to give something back to new filmmakers trying to get their foot in the door. They held it every year at Park City, Utah. It's about 40 miles up the road from Salt Lake City, ski basin town. Um, I've been there a couple times. It's incredibly beautiful location. Redford invested heavily in property up there. Um, Outside of Hollywood, he wanted to be outside of Hollywood, out of the reach of Hollywood in a way. Of course, that only lasted so long until Hollywood dropped in on his doorstep. Um, and they did indeed. But in the early years of Sundance, they didn't. And you could actually make a film for 10, 20, $30,000. Get some friends of yours together to be actors and shoot a story on a 60 millimeter camera. This is before video took over everything. You had to film it the old way, 16 millimeter, even though it was considered a substandard uh, camera to film feature films. It was most they were newsreel cameras. That's what they used to film the news with 16 millimeter cameras. And until some very innovative directors filmed their movies on 16 millimeter. And that's nothing new. Jean-Luc Godard filmed some of his early stuff on 16 millimeter because he didn't have the money for 35 millimeter. So it's twice the expense. And other Asian filmmakers and people from around the world had to use 16 because it was affordable, even though it's very expensive too. I mean, just to give you an example how expensive it is. I made a film on 16 millimeter called God Drives a Pontiac, and Uh, each roll of film is 10 minutes long. It's this big. It's a roll of film, literally this big on a canister. You mount it on the camera. Well, that canister uh, cost about $110 for 10 minutes. Okay. You think, well, that's all right. Make 10 of those, you got a movie. Well, yeah, but a lot of your film is going to be unusable. You're going to make mistakes with lighting and actors making mistakes and the boom microphone getting in the way and the camera messing up and the clouds and rain and the elements messing up. And so out of that 10 minutes, you might have 2 minutes maybe of usable footage if you're lucky. Um, and so I remember very well, we decided to buy 30 rolls of film to start the film. And so that's $110 a film. It's about $35,000. Or no, no, no. I'm sorry, sorry. It's about $4 or $5,000 to buy the film, and you hope that you're not going to need to do any more. Of course, we did. We ran out of film, and we had to order like 10 more. Halfway through it, we had to order more film from the labs out, and we were down out in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And we had to order from Kodak out in LA. Um, okay, so then you get your film. Then you have to get it developed. You have to get a negative made, which cost another $110 for that 10 minutes. So then you have 30 rolls of film to get a negative made. Okay, there's another $4 or $5,000 on getting the negative made. Then you have to get what they call an answer print in order to see the film. You have to get, and so that's another $110 a roll. There's another $4 or $5,000, and then you have to get what they call a work print. The work print is a film that you're going to edit on, and you're going to cut it up into pieces. You're going to scratch it. You're going to have all sorts of mistakes on it. You're going to put glue on it. You're going to tape it together. You're going to edit. Then you have to have that done. That's another $10 to get that work print, by the way. I mean that work print. Then you take that work print and you have to have somebody, an expert, cut your negative that you've already had developed. The negative is pristine. You cannot scratch the negative. If you do, it's permanent. It's on there forever. Whereas if you scratch your work print, that's okay. That's what they're there for, to just, but you can't scratch the negative. So you got to get an expert. You got to pay them some money and to cut your work print to match your negative. Then, after that's done, you have to send that negative to get a viewable answer print, another $110 a foot, whatever it is. The whole thing was about $30,000 just the film charges. And we didn't pay anybody. We paid everybody with contracts, deferred payments. They would be paid a certain rate. Technicians, we had about 30 people working on the film, technicians, cameramen, lighting men, grips, gaffers, costumers, makeupers. And then we had half a dozen actors that I promised $100 a day to. And we filmed the whole thing in 13 days. You film fast and furious. And by the time you're done, you have a film that's cost maybe 50, 60, $80,000 in kind. You haven't paid that cash out because a lot of it's on deferred payment. I mean, we had our food paid for in kind, uh, meaning if we sell the film, we owe them money. We had to get a lawyer. We're going to pay him with any money we make from the sale of the film because you have to have somebody do legal work for you. There's lots and lots of ins and outs. Shockingly, how many there are. And if you're lucky, you have a completed film out of it. You also have to have insurance, which I think costs us $4 or $5,000, because if somebody falls and breaks their arm on your shoot, they're going to sue you. And how do you protect yourself from personal lawsuit? You get insurance. Then you have to form a corporation, an LLC, they call it. At least that's what they called it in those days. So if someone does want to sue you for some reason, they can't sue me, Rex Thompson, personally. They sue the company. And we have sort of a protection there. Not that I ever had any money to come after me, but they could come after your future wages. If they're disgruntled, they hurt themselves or whatever, they could come after you. So you have that aspect. So there's a lots of ins and outs, and I'm sure even in the digital world, there's a lot of that still going on. Okay, so that's just to get a small film like I made out, to get it made. Now, to get it screened, what do you do? Well, there was no YouTube in those days. There was no Vimeo. There's no way to upload your movie to the internet. There was no internet yet, folks. This would be the early 90s. Internet didn't come around to the early 90s. And that was for businesses, it wasn't for artists. And there was no easy way to get anything uploaded. There's nothing to upload to, there's no platforms. Um, and so what you do is you submit a preview, say a 2-minute preview that you've made, um, to film festivals. And there's a lot of them out there. Some really big ones like Sundance, Telluride, Toronto, important film festivals. And then there's a ton of small ones that aren't so important. Um, and we got into a lot of small festivals: Santa Fe, Taos, Long Island, Tacoma, Washington. Got in some film festival in Miami. I don't even know what they were. And you have to pay a fee to get. You pay 40 $30 $40. You send your 2 minutes there, and they go, "We don't want it," but they get to keep your money. Or you get in, and now you got to go out there on your own money and present your film to an audience, or not, and you don't show up, but the audience wants to meet the writer and the directors and the actors, they do. Or if you get into a really big festival, you might get a angel to help pay your way, a producer or someone who sees your potential of selling your film. um, some film festivals, big ones, the Berlin and stuff, will invite you, and they'll pay for two people to come over. That's the best case scenario, obvious. Okay, now in the middle of all that, the godfather of all these festivals that started the independent film scene of the 90s, which produced films like Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction. No, that's two Tarantino movies. Clerks, Slackers, Sex Lives and Videotapes, Spike Lee movies. That that comes from Sundance. So what you do if you get into Sundance, you get to go to Park City, and they treat you great. I never got into Sundance; we were rejected. But I got into a film festival called Slamdance, which was held in Park City at the same time as Sundance. And our film got into that film festival. So we were up there promoting our film at the same time Sundance was going along. We had small screening rooms in a hotel, essentially, and a couple others, I think a bar even. And so you're screening your film in these projectors. You hope someone comes. You're handing out flowers all day, like you're promoting a rock band. If you've ever played in a band, which I have, you go out and promote yourself, and you hand out flyers to people. You post them on the bulletin boards, you get it out there. Now, this is before the internet. So it's like you couldn't get a Facebook page. You couldn't just post it all out there on the social network. You had to go out, do it the whole fashion way, in person, handing out your flyers. So Sundance all of a sudden became a hot commodity, especially after 1992, when a couple films played there and they scored big by being bought up by distributors who paid them a lot of money. And what I mean by a lot of money is you make a film for $30,000, and a distributor might buy your film for $1 million. That's pretty good, right? Pretty good return. or they might buy it for $3 million. Even better. Now you're going to be able to pay people back because you owe money, and you'll be able to get some of this money yourself if you're lucky. But it's a springboard to your next film, because once you get accepted at a place like Sundance, it's gold. Distributors will pay attention to you for now on. They're going to want to know what your next film's about. When's it coming out? So you better have that ready. When we went up there to Slamdance, we were just starting to do another film called Jesus Chrysler, and we were promoting that. We weren't filming it yet, but we were getting ready to film it. We had the script, we had the cast, we had the camera crew. We were hoping to get some interest. People finance us. That's what you do. You're constantly promoting the next project, because that's what everybody asks right now. What's your next film? What's the next project? Same thing if you're in a band. What's your next project? What's your next album? They don't want to know about the album right now, or as you guys would call them, CDs, or downloading MP3s, whatever you call it. They were called albums at one time. So I'm going to use that terminology, CDs, whatever. Um, they always want to know what the next one is. And you go, well, here's my new one's right here. That's already your year old, because your film's a year old because it takes you a year to edit. And so they want to know what the new thing is. At least they ask you. That means they're interested. Now, they're gambling. These independent distributors go up to Sundance and they only have so much money that they could spend. It's not like Warner Brothers, Universal, they have deep, deep, deep pockets. Most of them don't. And they have to make good on that, on their investment. They're worried about it. And if they don't, they're not going to last too much longer. And a lot of the distributors that I was up there with in those days aren't in business anymore. And there were some good ones. They stayed around for a while, but they couldn't sustain it. So a lot of these filmmakers like Greg Araki and Nick Gomez and Hal Hartley, Quentin Tarantino was an exception because Hollywood came to him really quick. Um, Spike Lee and others, Allison Anders, they they made their careers by getting into these important film festivals. Richard Linklater, who did Slackers, Robert Rodriguez, his film Mariachi never got into Sundance, so it wasn't good enough. But it gave him a career as a director, because somebody out in Hollywood got a copy of that film and they said, "We want to be in business with you. We'll give you money to make your next film," which was called Desperado, and with Antonio Banderas, which is essentially a remake of El Mariachi. I'm going to make you guys watch this 10-minute film school. That reminds me, I'm going to write it down. School, watch it. It's only a 5-minute film, maybe it's 10 minutes. Robert Rodriguez was a guy from Austin, Texas, who went to the university there, film school, which is a great, great film school. But his teacher said, "You never make it as a filmmaker." Well, he proved him wrong big time. Never believe what your teachers tell you. They should be encouraging you, not discouraging you. Anyway, he made a film called El Mariachi for $7,000. Yes, that's right, folks, $7,000. He filmed it without sound. They put in the sound later. It's complicated. You don't need to know the details unless you're interested, because there's a lot of documentaries about it. He wrote a great book called Rebel Without a Crew. He was the only man on the crew. He was the cameraman, the lighting man, and everything else. The writer, the director, the stunt coordinator. Anyway, and went down to this border town by Texas Mexico border, and he filmed this very interesting, I hate to say it, it's almost cute adventure movie about a mariachi who's a hired assassin. Okay, but it's rather tongue in cheek. It's got a lot of humor, a lot of humanness to it. Filmed it with his friends. You don't know any of the actors. You won't recognize them. Um, he didn't pay anybody. They're very clever the way they did it. And so now they bought that film from him. You can rent it. I don't know where it is right now. It could be on Criterion. It's out there. Maybe you've seen it, called El Mariachi. Now, the version you're seeing though had 500,000 more dollars put into it. They made the image look better. They improved the soundtrack. They put in a better everything. They invested 500,000 into it. You're not seeing the $7,000 movie. I happened to get to see that movie at a film festival through a 16 millimeter projector. If you don't know what those are, the kind we used to have in grammar school. Um, and it was still really quite brilliant. Um, even though it was very, very, very crude and primitive. Um, but he knew what he was doing. And he actually made the film for Mexican television to try to sell it to Mexico has different criteria for their television shows, and they produce a lot of low budget action soap opera type movies. And he thought that's what he's going to sell this thing for. So he had a plan. Well, this person in LA got a hold of the copy of the film and said, "Hold on, don't send it to anybody. I'm interested in this." And so they wanted to make another movie with him. It's called Desperado with Antonio Banderas. And they got a couple stars to be in it. Same story. Maybe you've seen it. It's a good action film. Same thing. He's a musician. He's a hired assassin. He looks great. Um, Running around with a machine gun and a guitar. And entertaining and humorous, tongue in cheek, and very human. Um, and so they wanted to produce this movie and they wanted to give him $10 million. Well, he was just beside himself. He said, "No, it's too much money." He goes, "Give me $10 million and I'll give you 10 movies, 10 $1 million movies." And they said, "This is how Hollywood thinks, folks." They go, "We don't want 10 $1 million movies. We want one $10 million movie." They want to see the money on the screen. And they felt that they don't want to give him a bunch of money to do a bunch of little films. Give him, and believe it or not, in 1995 or six, whenever he did that movie, that was considered a pretty healthy budget. Nothing like now, it's everything's $100 million, if not more. And he didn't like it, but because he was a low budget guy, he's a DIY. If you guys know anything about DIY, do it yourself. That comes from a punk rock ethos, which I totally live by. You do it yourself. If someone says no to you, then you say, "Thank you for that," and do it yourself. You don't need their money. If you're determined to do your film, you'll get it done. Eventually, we were turned down by everybody when I was asking for money. And people kept going, "Oh, you shouldn't do the film. Don't do the film unless you get someone to invest in your film." We did get about three investors. And then I actually had to get a bank loan and max out my charge cards. And people go, "No, don't ever invest your own money." Well, a ton of filmmakers do because you believe in it. This myth about never invest in your own movie. Why not? Whose movie are you going to invest in? Same with your band. Whose band are you going to invest in? Your band, right? Hopefully. So the point is, Sundance changed everything. Uh, the three films that changed the landscape was was I'm gonna forget the names. Oh man, I should have wrote them down. I know these names. Well, Aaron Mariachi one's The Living End is another one. It was made for $25,000 by Greg Araki, and for $30,000, Nick Gomez's film. And I love this film. I'm gonna forget the name of it right now. I'll find it right now on the old internet because it's important for me to get the name to you. Um, oh come on. Anyway, while I'm doing this ridiculous thing, Gomez. Pardon me. Yeah, the laws of gravity. Um, he made for $30,000. Now he's gone on to do a lot of other things here, some low budget horror films that I'm not thrilled with. But um, and he's directing a lot of TV, I see. So he got a career out of it. And it's a movie, it's very much like a Mean Streets type crime movie. Unknown actors, but a lot of the actors have become very known. Edie Falco's in it, who was in The Sopranos, and other actors were in The Sopranos also. Filmed in New York. It's a tough Mean Streets type of movie with great camera work, handheld camera work. And uh, Greg Araki is an Asian American filmmaker from LA, gay filmmaker. Now I say that because it's important, because he made this film about two gay men, outlaws, and they both have HIV. They got the AIDS, guys, and in those days, that was a death sentence. And so they go kind of on a wild crime spree, and it's a very hedonistic, nihilistic movie. They don't really believe anything uh, besides living fast and living a cool-looking corpse. But it had some brilliant camera work and the way they put it together, and that put him on the map. And he's gone on to direct some really good indie films, and um, he, obviously they drift into TV because TV will hire them. Um, so there's a career there. So my point is, those three films came out that 1992, changed everything. The next year was Clerks, that changed everything again. Maybe you've seen it, um, all because of the Sundance Film Festival. Things were happening through there. Now, powerful Hollywood people, New York people are looking at Sundance now. They're sending their people out there. They didn't do this before because they want to get the next Reservoir Dogs. They want to get the next Pulp Fiction. They want to see if it's out there, and they'll buy it and they'll invest in it. Here's a good example how much money is exchanged. Okay, it sounds like a lot. I know. Um, Blair Rich Project. Maybe you've heard of that. It was a low micro mini budget horror film, very cleverly made, um, in the early 2000s. They sold it at Sundance, yes, for $1 million. Okay, now that sounds awesome, especially when you spent $10,000 on your film. But the people who bought that film went on to make like $80 million off of it. That's where the real money was. And those guys who made that film didn't get that money. The guys, they got $1 million. That let them pay their people. Everybody got paid. Yes, they went on to have marginal careers. At least they got their film sold and they got on the map. And they got to direct other things. But the people who really made the money was the distributors. They made a fortune. Their $1 million was turned into 80, $90 million. Good investment. So that was the magic of Sundance. And that was a dream of everybody. Um, when Here's an example of how many films try to enter these film festivals. In those days, it'd be 8 or 900 films. That's a lot of films, you think, right now. Now it's 8 or 9,000 because films are a lot. 8 or 9,000 are submitted. That means someone has to watch these films and make a decision. They only pick 30, 40 films, folks. And it became very political. Who you knew? Why did this film get picked? Who did you take out to dinner? Who'd you give the cocaine to? Became kind of corrupt, and a lot of independent people thought Sundance is sold out, which they kind of did. All of a sudden, there's movie stars showing up, people like Paris Hilton and whoever's big now, Katy Perry, and all those people are starting to show up because it was hip to be seen there. and they kind of ruined the scene with their Hollywood A game, and Sundance became another Hollywood affectation. In the recent years, Redford has tried to take back some of the reins and the control and try to go back to the original vision. But as you well know, folks, there's no going back. You can't turn the clock back. Sorry, not possible. So other film festivals popped out around the country. Just about every major city's got a film festival. Small towns have them too. We have them here in Reading, the Sundial Bridge Film Festival, and there's one up in Ashland, Ashland Film Festival, Portland. Now, getting your film into there, is it going to get you a distributor? Probably not. Nobody's coming to Reading from Hollywood to see what films they could buy, but it gets you an audience, and it gets you out there, and you feel good about it, and it gets your resume bulked up. Uh, and you never know. You just never know what the next thing's going to be. So that's the beauty of it. So Sundance, important milestone film festival. Probably the last one I'm going to deal with, because after that it was just kind of business as usual with the sequels, and we're still in that mode right now. Only thing that's really changed with the new digital cinema, and I'm going to talk about that next time. How those little digital cameras changed everything again with it. In the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, they came up with this thing called Dogma 95. I'm going to address that next time. Anyway, there's still hope out there for the small guy. There is. Getting your story out there is important. You have Now we've got platforms. How you make money, that's a whole different deal. But at this point in time, you can get an audience. It's possible, and it just depends on how creative you are. Do you have what it takes? Are you interested in something like that? The drive has never gone out of me. Even if I make a film on this, I'm going to keep at it. What else is there to do? Anyway, on that note, remember, 4 more weeks of school. We're winding down, and I'll see you next time when the story film continues.